My stepmother stood on the porch of my own lake house, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, and said the same 6 words she'd been saying to me since I was 18 years old.
You are not really family.
Then she asked me, sweetly, like she was doing me a favor, to just wait by the car while everyone else carried their bags inside. Like I was the help. Like I hadn't grown up spending every summer of my childhood on that dock. I smiled. I said okay. I didn't tell her about the folder sitting on the passenger seat of my car. I didn't tell her that I'd flown out 3 days earlier, that I'd already had every lock on that house changed, or that the paperwork in that folder had her name on it, just not in the way she was about to assume. By the time the sun went down that night, my father's second family was going to understand something they had spent 11 years refusing to accept. That house was never theirs to use. And I was done pretending otherwise. I'm Rachel. I'm 30 years old. This is the story of the Christmas I stopped being a guest in my own life. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why I did what I did, you have to go back to when I was 16. That was the year my mother, Susan, died. Breast cancer, stage 4 by the time anyone caught it. 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral, 11 months of watching the strongest woman I knew shrink into someone I barely recognized, while my father, Robert, sat by her bed every night after work and promised me, in that too calm voice parents use, that everything was going to be fine. It wasn't fine. She died on a Tuesday in March. I remember thinking the whole world should have stopped turning, but it didn't. The mail still came. The bills still came. And 6 weeks later, so did casserole dishes from women at my father's office, one of whom was a widow named Denise. I try to be fair when I tell this part. Grief does strange things to people, and my father was drowning in his. Denise was kind to him in a way that must have felt like air to a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. I understand that now, as an adult. At 16, I understood exactly none of it. All I understood was that my father was smiling again, and it had nothing to do with me. I remember the night my father told me he was proposing. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, my mother's kitchen table, turning a small velvet box over in his hands, and said, "I know it's fast, Rachel. But Denise makes me feel like myself again. I hope you'll give her a chance." I said I would. I meant it, at 17, in the way only a grieving kid trying to keep the peace can mean something like that. They married a year and a half after the funeral. Denise moved into our house with her 2 daughters, Camille and Tara, both already away at college, 5 and 7 years older than me. Almost overnight, my childhood home filled up with furniture I didn't recognize and laughter I wasn't part of. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway the day they moved in, watching movers carry in a dining set that wasn't ours, and Denise turning to me with a bright, careful smile and saying, "This is going to be so good for all of us, Rachel." A real fresh start. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I set the table for 5 instead of 3. I learned that Camille took her coffee with too much sugar and that Tara hated anyone touching her books. I tried, in every small way a 16-year-old knows how to try. But there's a difference between a house full of people and a home. We were polite to each other. We had normal conversations at dinner. There was never any real warmth underneath it. It felt like all of us were just playing house, pretending to be a family because the paperwork said we were one now, when none of us actually felt it. What hurt the most, in those years, was watching my father change. He started spending more of his time at Camille and Tara's college events, their honor society dinners, their sorority formals, the small milestones a father shows up for. Things I was too young to be part of, and somehow too invisible to be asked about. I remember one Thanksgiving, maybe a year after the wedding, when Denise stood up to make a toast and thanked her girls for making the holiday feel whole again. She looked right past me when she said it. My father laughed along and never noticed. I felt like I was fading into the background of my own life, at the same kitchen table where I used to do homework while my mother graded papers across from me. One Christmas morning, the year I was 19, I came downstairs to find the whole family had already opened presents without me. Nobody had thought to wait, or even to wake me up. Denise apologized, sort of, saying, "Oh, we just figured you'd sleep in, you always did." My father laughed it off. I sat on the stairs for a minute before I made myself walk down and smile, because that's what I'd trained myself to do by then. Smile, and make it easy for everyone else. When I got into a state university 6 hours away, part of me grieved leaving that house. My mother had picked the wallpaper in my bedroom, and some nights I still slept better under it than anywhere else. But a bigger part of me was relieved to finally get away. College became my escape. I rarely came home, and when I did, I felt like a guest. Denise had redecorated nearly every room by then. She'd covered the walls with photos of her daughters, graduations, engagements, years of milestones I had no part of, until there wasn't a single picture of my mother left on display anywhere in the house I was born in. I asked about it once, gently, and Denise told me she'd just been doing some organizing, and that my mother's photos were somewhere safe in the attic. I never found the box. By the time I graduated and moved 2 states away for work, I called my father maybe once a month. I saw him at Christmas, some years, if Camille or Tara's plans didn't already take precedence. I told myself that was just how blended families worked. I told myself I didn't need any of them to feel like family, as long as I still had one person who did. I had my grandmother, Eleanor, my mother's mother. And she was about to change everything. Grandma Eleanor never remarried after my grandfather passed, and she never fully warmed to Denise either. She'd lost her only daughter to cancer, and I think some part of her looked at my face and saw my mother staring back, and she made a quiet decision, early on, that she was not going to let me disappear into the background of somebody else's family the way everyone else seemed willing to let happen. Every summer, no matter what else was going on, I spent 2 weeks at her lake house. It's the kind of place that makes you forget city stress and work deadlines entirely, cedar shingled, a little worn at the edges in the best way, with a dock my grandfather built by hand and a porch swing that's outlasted 3 coats of paint. I'd spent countless childhood summers there with both my parents, back when things were simpler, back when my mother was still alive. After she died, those 2 weeks with Grandma Eleanor became the only 2 weeks a year I felt completely, unquestionably myself. I remember sitting on that dock with her the summer I turned 20, feet in the water, and telling her how invisible I felt at home. She didn't offer platitudes. She just squeezed my hand and said, "You will always have a place here, Rachel. No one can redecorate this out from under you." I laughed it off at the time. I didn't understand yet how much she meant it, literally. She used to say the lake house had good bones and better memory, that it remembered every person who'd ever loved it properly, and forgot the ones who only ever passed through. I thought that was just something sweet grandmothers said. Looking back, I think she was warning me, gently, about exactly the kind of people who eventually would try to lay claim to it. Grandma Eleanor passed 2 years ago, 83 years old, in her sleep, in the same bedroom she'd shared with my grandfather for 4 decades. It was the second time in my life I lost the person who made me feel most like myself. At the reading of the will, I learned she'd left the lake house to me. Not to my father. Not split between anyone. Just me. Her lawyer told me she'd rewritten her will 11 years earlier, right around the time Denise moved into our family home, and that she'd said, in his words, she wanted to make sure Susan's daughter always had one thing in this world that was completely, unquestionably hers. I cried in that lawyer's office for 20 minutes. Not only from grief. From something closer to relief. For the first time since I was 16 years old, I had a place where I didn't have to share my space with people who made me feel like a guest. I should have known that the peace wouldn't last. At first, it was small. That first summer, my father asked if the family could come up for a long weekend, just to see the place, for old time's sake. I said yes. Of course I said yes. It held his memories too, in a way, his late mother-in-law, decades of history. But a long weekend became a full week the next summer. A full week became Denise asking, without really asking, if her book club could use the house for a girls' weekend, since it's just sitting empty most of the year anyway. When Camille got engaged, her save-the-date photos were taken on my grandfather's dock, in front of the boathouse he built, and nobody had thought to check with me first. I found out from a mutual cousin's Facebook comment, under a photo captioned, "Our family's beautiful lake house, 43 likes deep," my grandmother dead less than a year at that point. I remember staring at that caption for a long time, feeling something twist in my stomach that I didn't have a name for yet. Every time, I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict. I told myself that being generous with the house was finally a way to be seen as part of this family, even if it quietly cost me something each time. What I didn't understand yet was that generosity, when it's never once acknowledged, starts to look like entitlement to the person receiving it. By last year, I noticed Denise had started referring to it, in front of other people, as our family lake house. I let that slide too, and I want to be honest about why, because I think a lot of you watching know this feeling exactly. You swallow something small because you're afraid of what happens the moment you finally say it out loud. Then, this past November, I found out exactly how far Denise was willing to take the word ours. I got a call from Hank, the caretaker I've paid every year since my grandmother passed to check on the property in the off-season. He's a good man, been maintaining that house since my grandfather was alive. He called, a little confused, to ask if I'd sent someone out to get a quote on subdividing the lakefront lot. I hadn't sent anyone. Well, a woman came by in September, he told me. Said she was the owner. Real friendly. Asked me who handled the land survey back when the property was platted. I figured she was cleared to be asking, being family and all, so I gave her the surveyor's number. Hoped that was all right. I told him it was fine, and it wasn't his fault, though my hands were shaking a little by the time I hung up. I sat with my phone for a few minutes before I called the surveyor myself, just to hear it confirmed in someone else's words. He remembered her clearly, said she'd asked very specific questions about acreage, setback lines, and how long a subdivision application typically took to clear the county. It took a few more calls after that, but I confirmed the rest of it. Denise had contacted a local real estate agent, introduced herself as the property owner, and asked about the process for subdividing part of the land to build a second cottage, one she mentioned, offhand, that her daughter Camille and her husband might want as a starter home someday. She'd also asked, hypothetically, what the whole property might be worth if it were simply sold. I sat with that for a long time. It wasn't only the audacity of it, though there was plenty of that. What actually got to me was realizing that in Denise's mind, this had never been my house at all. It was a resource. Something to be managed, subdivided, monetized, and eventually handed down to her own daughters. The same slow, quiet way she had absorbed my father's attention, my father's holidays, my father's house, all those years ago. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't say anything to my father either. I just started paying very, very close attention. That's how I found out about Christmas. In the first week of December, my father called to loop me in on the holiday plans. Denise had decided the whole family, her, my dad, Camille and her husband, Tara and her boyfriend, would spend all 8 days of Christmas week at the lake house. I asked, carefully, what time I should plan to arrive. There was a pause on the line. Then my father, sounding uncomfortable in a way he rarely let himself sound, said Denise felt it might be better, just this once, if it were a smaller gathering. A real family trip, she'd called it, for Camille and Tara and their partners. I asked him directly, was I not invited to my own house for Christmas? He didn't answer. Denise got on the phone instead, and I will never forget how casual she sounded saying it. You're not really family, Rachel. Not the way they are. You know that. This trip is for people who need this time together. You've got your own life now. I'm sure you understand. 11 years of implying it, of quietly making me feel like an outsider at every holiday table, and she finally just said it out loud, plainly, about my own house. In the background, I heard Tara mutter something to Camille. I couldn't make out all of it, just the tail end. Kind of harsh, don't you think? Nobody answered her. Denise just asked, again, if I could have the caretaker leave a key under the mat, since they'd be arriving on the 24th. I told her I'd think about it. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't sad. I was clear. I didn't call Denise back. I didn't call my father either. I called a lawyer. I brought her everything, Eleanor's will, the deed with my name as sole owner, 2 years of property tax receipts paid entirely from my own account, invoices for every repair and dock board and winterization service, all of it under my name, and my name only. She flipped through the folder for a few minutes, then looked up at me over her glasses. This is about as clean a title as I've ever seen, she said. You're asking me if you're allowed to keep people out of your own home? I guess I am, I said. Rachel, she said, you don't need my permission for that. You've never needed anyone's permission for that. I asked her anyway, one simple question. Was there anything, legally, stopping me from telling my family they weren't welcome in my own house? There wasn't. Of course there wasn't. It had never really been a legal question. It was always the emotional one I'd been avoiding since I was 16 years old. Was I finally willing to stop being generous toward people who had never once been generous with me? I decided I was. I booked a flight for December 21st, 3 days ahead of Denise's planned arrival. I called Hank and asked him to have every lock changed before I got there, new deadbolts, a new code on the garage, the whole property rekeyed start to finish. I printed 3 copies of a folder, the will, the deed, the tax records, and the real estate agent's email, the one that listed Denise as property owner, pending. I want to be clear that I wasn't doing this to hurt anyone. I was doing it because I was tired, genuinely, bone-deep tired, of being the only person in that family who was ever expected to bend. I spent 3 days alone at the lake house before anyone arrived. I built a fire. I put fresh sheets in the guest rooms, because despite everything, some small part of me still hoped my father, at least, might choose to stay. On the morning of the 24th, I woke up before sunrise and sat on the dock for a while, watching the mist come off the water the way it always did in Grandma Eleanor's old photographs. I thought about the version of me who used to set the table for 5 people who never quite made room for a 6th. I thought about how long I'd mistaken silence for peace. Then I went inside, made coffee, set the folder on the porch table beside me, and waited. Their car came up the drive around 11. Denise got out first, sunglasses already on, scanning the porch the way you'd inspect a property you were thinking of buying. My father followed, then Camille and her husband, then Tara. Denise reached the door first and put her key in the lock. It didn't turn. She jiggled it the way people do when they refuse to believe what's right in front of them, and I finally stood up from the porch swing. The locks are new, I said. I had them changed a few days ago. She turned around, and for just a second, something flickered across her face that almost looked like fear. Then it hardened right back into the tone she'd used on the phone. Rachel, what is this? We drove 6 hours. I know you did, I said. I also know you told a real estate agent in September that you owned this property. I know you asked about subdividing the lot for Camille. And I know that 3 weeks ago, in front of my father, you told me I wasn't really family. My father went very quiet. Behind Denise, Camille looked at her mother, and for the first time in my life, I saw actual doubt cross her face. Mom, she said quietly, what real estate agent? Denise didn't answer her. I opened the folder. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. I laid the will on the porch table, the deed beside it, and the printed email on top. This house was left to me. Only me. It was never ours. It was never a family resource for you to plan around or profit from. I let you use it for 2 years because I wanted, more than almost anything, to finally feel like part of this family. 3 weeks ago, you made it very clear that I'm not. So I'm done pretending. Denise's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at my father, waiting for him to do what he'd always done, smooth it over, fix it before it became a real conversation. Robert, she said, say something. My father looked at the will on the table, then at me, and something in his face shifted, like he was seeing the last 11 years all at once, from a different angle than he'd ever let himself look at them before. Denise, he said quietly, you called an agent about selling my mother-in-law's house? I was just exploring options, she said. For the family. It's not your house to explore options for, he said. It was the first time in 11 years I'd ever heard him say a sentence like that to her, and I think it landed on all of us harder than anything I'd said. He didn't say anything else after that. I won't let strangers into my house, I said quietly. Well, let's start there. Denise didn't stay to argue. I think, in her own way, she understood there was nothing left to argue. She was back in the car within 10 minutes, and after a tense, whispered exchange, Camille and Tara went with her, along with their partners. Nobody wants to spend a holiday standing on a porch that clearly doesn't want them there anymore. My father stayed behind. He stood on the steps for a long moment after their car disappeared down the drive, and then he finally said the thing I'd been waiting 11 years to hear. I should have said something a long time ago. We sat on that porch for hours. I told him everything, not just the real estate agent, but every Christmas I'd spent feeling like an afterthought, every school event he'd missed for Camille's, every year I'd told myself it was fine because at least he was happy. He cried, which I'd only seen him do once before, at my mother's funeral. His apology felt real, not performed, not aimed at smoothing things over before dinner, the way Denise's always were. I don't know exactly where things stand between him and Denise now. He hasn't left her, and I've never once asked him to, that was never my place. But he calls me every single week now, just to talk. He came up to the lake house alone this past spring, and the two of us spent a whole weekend restaining the dock my grandfather built, just like it used to be, before everything got complicated. At one point, sanding the same board my grandfather probably sanded 50 years earlier, he said, your mother would have liked seeing us do this together. I told him I thought so too. Neither of us said much else that whole afternoon, but for the first time in a long time, the quiet between us didn't feel like distance. It just felt like peace. Denise and I haven't spoken since that morning. Camille sent one short, stiff text a few weeks later, saying she didn't know the whole story about the real estate inquiry. I actually believe her. I think Denise had been quietly managing all of us for a very long time, the same careful way she'd been managing that house. I spent this past summer at the lake house alone, and for the first time since Grandma Eleanor passed, it finally felt like exactly what she'd wanted it to be, a place that was completely, unquestionably mine. I think about that phone call a lot. The one where Denise said I wasn't really family, like it was simply an obvious fact she was doing me a favor by stating out loud. For years, I believed family was something you were owed automatically, something that existed just because paperwork said it should. It took me until I was 44 years old to understand that family isn't a title. It's a pattern of behavior, repeated over years, that either makes you feel safe, or makes you feel like a guest in your own life. For 11 years, I let people define my worth by how much space they were willing to let me take up. The moment I stopped asking for that space, and simply claimed what already belonged to me, everything changed. Not because I wanted revenge, I never did. I wanted, finally, to stop shrinking. If there's someone in your life who's made you feel like a guest in your own story, I hope this reminds you of something. You don't need their permission to take up space in a life that already belongs to you. Grandma Eleanor was right, in the end, about the good bones and the better memory. That lake house remembers exactly who showed up for it, and who only ever passed through pretending they had. I think, some nights, I finally do too. If this story meant something to you, let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more real stories like Rachel's, make sure you're subscribed, because we've got new videos just like this one every week.